Arizona State University welcomes 3,500 Indigenous students from Arizona and across the nation. It serves one of the largest populations of Indigenous students among U.S. colleges and universities. We created a sense of place for tribal nations to create futures of their own making through community outreach and research, taught by world-class Indigenous faculty where they see a reflection of themselves and their experiences. Find community at ASU.
This is Indian Country Today.
Gutwatsi Hopa, thank you for joining us. I'm Aaliyah Chavez. Another First Nation in British Columbia is reporting the discovery of unmarked graves near the site of a former residential school. The St. Mary's Band located 182 unmarked graves in 2020 using ground-penetrating radar. However, it only recently told the nearby Lower Kootenai First Nation about the discovery. APTN reports the institution, like many, was run by the Roman Catholic Church from 1912 until the early 1970s. All Indigenous children ages 7 to 15 were required by law to attend residential schools, where many received cruel or fatal treatment. This is the third First Nation to report finding mass graves near a residential school. Indigenous climate advocates are bringing their message to the entrance of the White House. The group said yesterday they want President Biden to stop fossil fuel projects like Enbridge's Line 3 pipeline and to put climate justice in the front of his infrastructure plans.
If we don't use our voice, we're going to lose all of this, everything that we have so far. You know, we talked a lot about the boarding schools and the children and the mass graves that are being found, and we cannot let their little lives be in vain, right? We have to stand up for a future for all of our kids, and for, of course, it's also cliche, but no, it really is true. We do need to stand up, and it's powerful.
About 100 protesters showed up to share their concerns with stories of the pipeline's impact on them. But some of the climate advocates don't have a lot of hope that Biden will follow through on his climate justice plan.
We don't really hold much hope that Biden is going to stop these permits. We don't have much hope that Biden's going to follow through on his climate promises. So we're here today actually reaching out to the people, hoping that, you know, those who are sitting at home watching these videos and that they hear us, that something about our fight moves something in them, and that they'll join us in northern Minnesota to protect the rivers and uplift and protect the Anishinaabe and also the ancestral homelands of the Lakota, Nakota, Dakota people.
Protesters also carried a 100-foot black pipeline snake to replicate the pipeline they oppose. This is the second demonstration this week. A sex trafficking sting in northern Minnesota caught 2 more workers from Enbridge's Line 3 pipeline. The 2 were among 6 men arrested between June 26th and the 27th. Minnesota's Bureau of Criminal Apprehension says they were taken into custody after responding to an ad on a sex advertisement website. To make the arrests, the Bureau worked with the Tribes United Against Sex Trafficking Task Force, as well as state law enforcement agencies. Though police have not filed charges for those arrests, 2 of the men have been fired, according to Enbridge officials. To read more, visit IndianCountryToday.com and search for the headline, Sex Trafficking Sting Nets 2 More Enbridge Workers. A unique fellowship is selecting 21 women for their Intergenerational Indigenous Women's Leadership Program. The fellowship is part of the Spirit-Aligned Leadership Program and connects Indigenous elders with younger Native women. Together, they work on knowledge transfer, healing and wellness, climate change, and Indigenous women's roles and leadership. The executive director of the program read a statement from one of the participants in the program who overcame the challenges the Indian schools put on her.
I've been fortunate to have them in my life so that I could face the racism in this world, to have the knowledge and strength to break down the barriers for our people in every part of society. And so these elder women come from a generation where the civilization regulation impacts, where the boarding school experience, the intense need for healing in our communities so that we can better participate in our communities.
The fellows represent Indigenous peoples from Canada and the United States. And those are the headlines from Indian Country Today. I'm Aaliyah Chavez. When we come back, Meghan Sullivan breaks down the recent Supreme Court decision involving Alaska Native corporations. Plus, she's the first ever female superintendent of the Santa Fe Indian School. Christie Abeyta joins us on her first day on the job. The Santa Fe Indian School was first established in 1890 as a federal Indian boarding school and was initially tasked with assimilating Native children. The story of the school, however, has taken a sharp turn since then and is now considered a national leader in Indian education. In 1976, almost 100 years after its founding, governors of the 19 pueblos in New Mexico took control of the school and assumed operations of it following the Indian Self-Determination and Assistance Act. SFIS is now a fully tribally controlled school, and its mission encourages its 700 students to participate in culture and pursue an education at the same time. We're joined today by the school's new superintendent, who happens to be the first ever female to hold the position, Christie Abeyta. Welcome, Superintendent.
Good morning. Goatsi Hopa, Sengi Tamu to all my relations. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Start us off by telling us about your school. Where is it located, and how would you describe the community?
Santa Fe Indian School is located in Santa Fe, New Mexico. We're owned and operated by the 19 Pueblo governors of New Mexico. Our school has been in existence since 1977 here on the Santa Fe campus. Prior to that, the initial contract was for the Albuquerque Indian School. You know, the history dates back to what you just shared and spoke of, and that was it being a federal Indian boarding school initially, which was after the self-determination turned over to the All Indian Pueblo Council of Governors.
Given that federal Indian boarding schools have been in the news recently, what do you think is the mission and the purpose of the Santa Fe Indian School now?
So today we've taken education in a new direction. You know, it started with the Indian Self-Determination Act, and it was really with the effort to control the education of our students, therefore controlling the destiny and the progress for which we were able to build capacity, knowledge, experts, and expertise. We've really worked hard at Santa Fe Indian School to create a rigorous academic program while supporting a holistic learning experience, bringing in culturally relevant, responsive education, traditional native languages, you know, traditional cooking and arts, being able to support our students in their talents and skills and build, you know, added to that academic skills that are supporting them and helping them thrive in multiple ways and all over the nation right now. We have students that attend Ivy League schools, four-year universities and colleges, some who have acquired skills and you know, career experiences through the dual credit and you know, opportunities here at Santa Fe Indian School. So we've really grown. We've grown from, you know, the the initial intent and purpose of Indian boarding schools, which was based on assimilation and really transforming students and from their traditional identity into Americans, where today here at Santa Fe Indian School, we embrace that identity, we embrace the culture and language of our students, and we support that growth, holistically, so that they are, prepared to move into career and college field.
You've been a member of the SFIS community now for some time, and as I mentioned earlier, today is your first day on the job. I don't think a lot of people know, but you actually have served in various capacities at the Santa Fe Indian School, from working in middle school academics to the dorms to even being a basketball coach. Tell us, what have you heard from students, especially during the pandemic? What was learning like for them? And, where are you all at now?
Learning was difficult. There's just no other way to put it. The challenges that our students experienced were traumatic. They were trying, they were difficult. We've heard and seen multiple stories of loss, students who struggled with access and connectivity, students who struggled with self-discipline and being able to self-motivate and be productive, being at home alone, with no support because mom and dad and grandma and grandpa were working, or bearing the responsibility of caretaking for their elders, their siblings, family members. Our students really were challenged. We did have a huge number of students that were able to overcome those challenges and be successful, but we also did see that a lot of our students did struggle, and we're working hard today to help them and to close that gap and prepare them for the upcoming school year.
And what do you think that upcoming school year will look like? Will that be in person? Will it continue to be virtual? What plans do you have currently?
The plans right now rest with the Board of Trustees. They're in constant consultation with our tribal leadership. Ultimately, collectively, taking into consideration all our villages and their wishes and desires for their students is going to be paramount in terms of the decision that the board makes in terms of return to school next school year. But, I'm hopeful. I think, all of our tribal leaders, our governors, our families, our councils, all those shareholders that weigh in on this decision ultimately have the best interest of their communities and the health and safety and vitality of those communities at heart. And so we respect that. We are small communities, as you know, here in Pueblo country. So every member is very important to us, and we want to ensure that that everybody is safe, and that our plan here at Santa Fe Indian School adheres to those safety protocols and procedures that our tribal leaderships want for their kids.
I want to take a step back a little bit and switch gears and talk about yourself. This is your very first day on the job, and you were selected out of a pool of applicants. How did you feel showing up to work today? And, has it hit you yet that you're the leader now of this school?
I was so anxious. I've been in prayer for the last month and a half, and I was just sharing a story with our interim superintendents this morning, and I said, several people had approached me and were like, have you ever considered, being a superintendent here? What are your thoughts? The job opened up and so on and so forth. And I got to a point where I had convinced myself I was ready and I felt prepared and that I could fill this capacity with my knowledge and expertise and move the school forward. But I still had some reservations, and it wasn't until the deadline at 5 o'clock that I actually hit submit. because I was still going back and forth, and and my faith is strong, and I placed a lot of this decision in prayer, and for whatever reasons, the Creator and our spirits led me to this place. And I couldn't I couldn't sleep last night. I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I was on the road to work by 5. I was here in the office at 6, and just really taking it all in, and just so excited to be here. It's been a long journey for me. Like you mentioned earlier, I've been working at the school in multiple capacities for the last 25 years. I started as a intramural coordinator, where I organized and planned sports tournaments and leagues, and we had fun in the gym. And I don't remember what I was doing when you were here, but I think I was probably either in the dorm, a security guard, a substitute. I've done it all.
Thank you for bringing that up. Yes, I am an alumni of the Santa Fe Indian School, and my family, like a lot of Pueblo communities, have very close ties to the community. And I think a very important part of your promotion has been the fact that you're the first female to lead in this position. For all the young female students at the school now, they now have someone to look up to and say, what if I want to be a superintendent someday? What does that feel like for you?
It's a huge responsibility, and I think as our role as Pueblo women, we have a significant role within our communities, and we are the caretakers, we are the caregivers in multiple arenas, in multiple ways in our communities. And so, when we look to other Pueblo women and we think about the role models that we have, you don't have to look too far, because you see within our own families, the matriarchs, the people that have taught us and instilled in us the core values of love, compassion, care, giving, contributing, and all these different very significant values that I hold. And so for me, this responsibility is very important to me. And then it's very important that I continue to model those values that have guided my life. And I would wish for future generations, so that, young Native Pueblo women have people to look up to, who can aspire to, break the glass ceiling and hold that door open for future generations, so that more and more Pueblo women leaders have an opportunity to lead in different capacities within our communities.
Well, Superintendent Abeyta, I appreciate your time, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Aaliyah. It was great talking with you today.
When we come back, we're joined by ICT reporter Meghan Sullivan, who has more on the eligibility of Alaska Native corporations and federal COVID-19 funding. The Supreme Court recently ruled that Alaska Native corporations were eligible for pandemic relief funding found in the CARES Act. The ruling was the culmination of a year-long battle that divided Indian country and called into question long-standing legal precedents. Joining us today is ICT reporter Meghan Sullivan. Welcome, Meghan.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Tell us, what does the Supreme Court decision mean for Alaska?
Yeah, so at the basic level, $500 million will now be going towards the Alaska Native corporations, which are for-profit corporations here that provide benefits and dividends to the thousands of Alaska Natives that live here. They were helpful in providing services throughout the pandemic. And I think a lot of people were hoping that maybe this funding could have been used at the peak of the pandemic, when their services included community response kits, elder care packages, food and security support, and temporary housing. But when I've talked to people who work in the corporations in the past, they say looking forward, they want to use this funding to kind of continue help organize any post-pandemic, end of pandemic efforts. They have kind of more of the bandwidth to do large scale organizing here than some of the individual tribes and villages do. And they're focusing maybe on some mental health initiatives and continued public health initiatives, such as elder and food insecurity assistance.
For the viewers who may be hearing about this for the first time, can you tell us why was this case controversial to begin with, and what was at odds here? What was the central issue of this case?
Yeah, so basically back in spring 2020, when the CARES Act coronavirus relief funding was just beginning, Alaska Native corporations were designated to get a portion of the $8 billion intended for tribal governments. And for those unfamiliar, as I mentioned, Alaska Native corporations are for-profit companies that provide dividends and some other benefits to Alaska Natives. And, the litigation began when a handful of tribes sued, stating that the fund should be going to tribes only, and that Alaska Native corporations, even though they serve Native people, aren't the same as tribes and shouldn't receive funding going towards tribes. And so that kind of kickstarted this year-long court process, which eventually made it to the Supreme Court. And there were tribes in the lower 48 as well in Alaska, who, were supportive of the corporations not receiving the funding. So it was some division here in Alaska as well as throughout the country.
And for the tribes who were opposed, what were they saying? They were saying that Alaska Native Corporation shouldn't receive this money, but why were they saying that?
Yeah, I think, they were fearing maybe that people would start viewing corporations as the same as tribes, which they're not, obviously. And that could potentially mess up future relationships with the government, the definition of self-determination. But I think on the other hand, the Alaska Native corporations were fearing that the rule of ISDEA, the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act, and the longstanding legal precedent there would be changed, because under that specific act, Alaska Native corporations have been eligible to receive the same kind of treatment as tribes for decades. And so that's really kind of informed how the landscape up here has developed over the years, with the understanding that they will receive those same benefits under ISDEA. And, they aren't considered tribes in any other circumstance. They don't have a government to government relationship. And no one really equates the two who's pro Alaska Native corporations receiving the funding, but they do believe that they should be considered tribes under ISDEA. And so people were really fearing how it was going to affect the legal landscape going forward, both on the tribal side and on the Alaska Native corporate side.
What has been the reaction since the Supreme Court decision?
I think in Alaska, a lot of people are happy that the corporations are going to be able to receive the relief funding, and also that the long-standing ISDEA precedent wasn't overturned. But of course, there are some tribes in Alaska that were against the Alaska Native corporations receiving the CARES Act funding. So it's definitely a generalization to say that every Alaska Native was supportive of this ruling. But I would say overall, there's been a lot of celebration from the corporate side just now that they're able to use this funding finally and implement it after months of litigation.
And what has been the reaction from the tribes who actually brought this litigation to light? What has been their reaction?
Yeah, so they weren't too happy with it. And I think there's going to be continued efforts going forward to kind of look at when Alaska Native corporations are eligible under ISDEA and what the relationship is there, and if that should be something that continues on.
You mentioned earlier that already Alaska Native corporations have plans to use this coronavirus relief funding. What do they have planned exactly? Can you tell us more about that?
I don't have anything specific at the moment. I think it's more with their public health initiatives. So, this looks like elder care, food insecurity, maybe some last minute vaccine rollouts. And again, a lot of it is their capacity to organize. large scale organizing in the state and kind of roll out these efforts in a more broad capacity. And interestingly enough, they are focused next on mental health initiatives, which is really interesting. You've seen a lot of people struggle with mental health during the pandemic. Wasn't the main public health concern at the time, obviously, but it is one that people should look at. So they've been mentioning that, but I don't really know what it's going to look like. I'm excited to kind of hear more about it now that they've actually received the funding.
Very quickly, Meghan, while we have you here, you're covering our coverage of the 50th anniversary of ANCSA. Can you tell us what's coming up the pipeline with that?
Yeah, so we have a lot of stories focused on the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, which honestly relates back to this case because it completely changed the landscape here in Alaska and kind of our general Alaska Native cooperation between the tribes and the corporations. And so we're looking at it from all angles. We're looking at it from legal angles, like cases like this. We're looking at it from a cultural angle, how the tribes and the corporations kind of exist together, how it's affected overall Alaska Native identity. And there's a lot of different topics coming down the pipeline in the next few months. So we're really excited to be reporting on it. And as you can see from this case, it's still a very relevant topic in Alaska that has kind of, unknown repercussions that materialize in different ways, such as this court case.
Well, we will continue to follow your reporting. Thank you so much for being here, Meghan.
Thank you.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. I'm Aaliyah Chavez. Thank you for watching.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.
This is Indian Country Today.